In 2004, the state of Texas strapped a man to a table, injected lethal chemicals into his veins, and watched him die. He looked around that room and said, "The only statement I want to make is that I am an innocent man, convicted of a crime I did not commit. I have been persecuted for 12 years for something I did not do. From God's dust I came, and to dust I will return, so the earth shall become my throne." Those were his last words. And here is the part that should make every single one of you deeply uncomfortable. Multiple fire experts, scientists, and investigators who reviewed his case after his death all reached the same conclusion. The fire that killed his 3 daughters was almost certainly an accident. Cameron Todd Willingham did not murder anyone, and Texas executed him anyway. This story is not just about one man. It is about a broken system and what happens when the law decides it has already made up its mind. December 23, 1991, 2 days before Christmas, a small, quiet town in Corsicana, Texas. Cameron Todd Willingham was 23 years old. He was a former auto mechanic. He was a father, and by most accounts, he loved his daughters. That night, his wife Stacy had gone to the Salvation Army to buy Christmas presents for their 3 little girls, Amber Louise, who was 2 years old, and the 1-year-old twins, Carmen and Cameron. Willingham was home with the children. He fell asleep. He woke up to smoke. He said he tried to reach his daughters. The fire was already too far gone. He could not get to them. He ran outside screaming. And here's a detail that was never properly told at trial. Neighbors and firefighters who arrived at the scene said that Willingham was so desperate to get back into that burning house that he had to be physically restrained. He fought so hard to go back in for his daughters that they handcuffed him to stop him. That is not the behavior of a man who started the fire, but investigators did not see a grieving father. They saw a suspect. By the time firefighters arrived, it was too late. All 3 girls died of smoke inhalation. It was a tragedy, a devastating, heartbreaking tragedy that no parent should ever survive. But within hours before the ashes had even cooled, investigators had already started looking at Cameron Todd Willingham, not as a grieving father, but as a suspect. For days after the fire, on December 27, 1991, 2 fire investigators walked through the burned remains of the Willingham home. They examined the burn patterns on the floor, looked at how the fire had moved through the house, and made notes. And based on their examination, they concluded that the fire was deliberately set. They pointed to what they called pour patterns, marks on the floor that they said proved an accelerant, like lighter fluid, had been spread intentionally to start the fire and block any rescue attempt. They pointed to a cracked glass pattern they called crazed glass, which they said was a sign of a fire that burned extremely hot and fast, the way a chemically accelerated fire would burn. They were certain, completely certain, and their certainty sent Cameron Todd Willingham to death row. Here is what they did not know or did not say. Those same burn patterns, modern fire science has proven they occur in accidental fires all the time. The floor materials, the furniture, the way heat moves through a structure, all of it can create patterns that look exactly like pour patterns without a single drop of accelerant being present. That crazed glass, it is caused by rapid cooling, like when a firefighter sprays water on hot glass. It has nothing to do with how the fire started. And here is something that should have ended the case before it even began. No chemical evidence of any accelerant was ever found in the debris. Not one trace. In a case where prosecutors claimed lighter fluid was poured throughout the house, forensic testing of the debris found nothing. The entire scientific foundation of the case against Willingham was built on methods that were already becoming outdated in 1991 and would be completely discredited in the years that followed. But in 1992, nobody was questioning it. The experts had spoken, and Cameron Todd Willingham was going to pay for it. The prosecution needed 2 things to make their case stick: the bad science and a motive. The science they had, even if it was wrong. The motive was harder. There was no life insurance policy, no financial reason to harm his children, no history of violence toward them, nothing that pointed to why a father would do something so unthinkable. So prosecutors did something that should shock you. They pointed to posters on his wall. Cameron Willingham liked rock music. He had posters of bands like Led Zeppelin and Iron Maiden on the walls of his home. Prosecutor stood in front of a jury and suggested with a straight face that these posters proved he was a Satanist, that he was an evil man capable of evil things. That was the motive. Rock music posters. His prison pen pal Elizabeth Gilbert later said it best: they never established a motive. So their motive became that Todd was just an evil person. And then came the jailhouse informant, a man named Johnny Webb, who was facing serious robbery charges at the time, told the jury that while he and Willingham were both in the Navarro County Jail, Willingham had confessed to starting the fire. But here is what Webb actually claimed Willingham said. He told the jury that Willingham started the fire to cover up an injury that his wife had given one of their children. The autopsy reports on all three girls showed no signs of injury whatsoever. No trauma. Nothing. Which means Webb's story made no sense from the very beginning. But the jury believed him. What the jury did not know was that Johnny Webb had been promised favorable treatment on his robbery charges in exchange for his testimony. The prosecutor, John Jackson, stood in that courtroom and told everyone, including the jury, that Webb was receiving nothing in return. That was a lie. Years later, a handwritten note was discovered in Webb's case file. It stated that Webb's charges should be reduced, and the words written on that note were based on Coop and Willingham. Cooperation. The deal was right there in writing. And there is more. In the year 2000, 4 years before the execution, Johnny Webb actually wrote a letter to the Navarro County District Attorney's office asking that his testimony against Willingham be made null and void. He said he was pressured to lie. He wanted to take it back. That letter was never passed to Willingham's legal team. It was buried. Cameron Todd Willingham went to trial with bad science, a motive built on rock music posters, and a jailhouse informant whose entire testimony was a fabrication. The jury deliberated and found him guilty. He was sentenced to death. Cameron Todd Willingham was 24 years old. 12 years. 12 years of waking up in a cell knowing you did not do what they said you did. During those years, Willingham maintained his innocence every single day. He wrote letters. He gave interviews. He never once changed his story. His marriage to Stacy did not survive. She eventually came to believe he was guilty, and her changed position was used against him. But there was one person who believed him. A woman named Elizabeth Gilbert became his pen pal in 1999. She started visiting him, and when she began looking into the details of his case, she was troubled by what she found. She raised her concerns with journalists and organizations who cared about wrongful convictions. Eventually, his case reached the Innocence Project, the organization that has helped exonerate hundreds of wrongfully convicted people across America. The Innocence Project connected his case to a man named Dr. Gerald Hurst. He reviewed everything, and his conclusion was devastating. He said, and I quote, "A contemporary fire origin and cause analyst might well wonder how anyone could make so many critical errors in interpreting the evidence." He found no reliable evidence of arson. None. His report was sent to Governor Rick Perry and the Texas Board of Pardons and Paroles before the execution date. The board voted 15-0 to deny clemency. Governor Perry refused to delay the execution. There is no record of anyone in the governor's office reading Dr. Hurst's report. No response. On February 17, 2004, Cameron Todd Willingham was executed by lethal injection at the Huntsville unit in Texas. He was 36 years old. He was pronounced dead at 6:20 in the evening. After the execution, the scrutiny of his case did not stop. It intensified. Months after the execution, the Chicago Tribune published a major investigative report that tore apart every piece of evidence used to convict him. Then the New Yorker published an exhaustive investigation by journalist David Gran that debunked not just the fire science, but every single other piece of evidence in the case. And then the Texas Forensic Science Commission hired an independent fire scientist named Craig Baylor to conduct a full review of the investigation. His findings were devastating. He concluded that the original investigators had a poor understanding of fire science, that their methods were outdated, that the evidence they used to prove arson could not be supported by modern science or investigative standards. 9 of the nation's leading arson scientists independently reviewed the evidence in the Willingham case. All 9 reached the same conclusion. The fire was not arson. And here's the piece that should make your blood run cold. At the same time Willingham was on death row, Another man in Texas named Ernest Willis had been convicted of arson and sentenced to death. The evidence used against Ernest Willis was virtually identical to the evidence used against Cameron Todd Willingham. Same outdated science, same methods, same type of investigators. The Innocence Project took Ernest Willis's case. Ernest Willis was exonerated, freed, compensated, because the forensic evidence was ruled scientifically invalid. Dr. Gerald Hurst, the same expert who reviewed both cases, said this about them. He said, "It was like I was looking at the same case, just changed the names." Ernest Willis got a walk out of prison. Cameron Todd Willingham got a lethal injection. People ask, was he really innocent? Was Willingham actually a good person? And I want to address that directly because it matters. Willingham was not a saint. He had a rough history, and there are people who knew him who still believe he did it. But here's the thing. In a court of law, in a system that is supposed to be built on proof beyond reasonable doubt, the question is not whether someone is a good person. The question is whether the evidence proves what the state says it proves. And in Cameron Todd Willingham's case, according to 9 independent fire scientists, multiple investigative journalists, and the Texas Forensic Science Commission, the answer is no. The evidence did not prove it, which means the state of Texas took a man's life based on science that was wrong. A jailhouse informant who had already written a letter saying he lied, and rock music posters. Now here is what happened to the people responsible. Governor Rick Perry was asked about the case years after the execution. He stood by the decision. He said he had no regrets. He called Willingham a monster. The prosecutor John Jackson, the man who had the deal with Johnny Webb, the man who stood in court and lied about it, faced a state bar complaint for misconduct. The bar took the case to a jury. The jury cleared him. In 2010, a Texas judge named Charlie Baird wrote a formal court order that would have exonerated Cameron Todd Willingham posthumously. He stated that the state of Texas wrongfully executed Cameron Todd Willingham. A higher court immediately stepped in and blocked that order from becoming official. Nobody was held accountable. Cameron Todd Willingham is still dead. There's a question that sits at the heart of this story. What happens when the system gets it wrong? With a prison sentence, there is a chance, however small, to correct a mistake. With an execution, there is no correction. Cameron Todd Willingham spent the last 12 years of his life telling anyone who would listen that he did not kill his daughters. And the evidence gathered both before and after his death suggests he was telling the truth. His stepmother Eugenia Willingham has spent years trying to clear his name. She was with him in his final hours. She said, "It has been 18 years, and I still feel the raw pain of that day." She is still fighting. 2 little twins and their older sister lost their lives in a house fire 2 days before Christmas. Their father lost his life 12 years later on a gurney in Huntsville, Texas. Whether he was guilty or innocent, this case forces us to ask a question we should never stop asking. Are we absolutely sure enough to make a decision we can never take back? Because Texas was sure, and Texas may have been catastrophically wrong.